which would be our roundtable discussion number 3 on the dollars and cents behind safeguarding Caribbean networks and information systems. I'll be the moderator for this panel. I'm Nigel Cassimire. I'm Deputy Secretary General and Head of Regional Policy Development for the CTU. And joining me, I would have 3, well, I guess informed speakers. The first of which is Mr. Shernon Osepa. He is the ISOC's Internet Society's Director for Caribbean Affairs. And joining him as well on the panel would be Ms. Kerry-Ann Barrett, who is one of the specialists at the CICTE group of the OAS. I'll let her talk a little bit about what they do as well. And thirdly, Mr. Sean Fouché of the Ministry of National Security with the government of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. And we'll be exploring this issue of dollars and cents. We'll be looking at the scope of work associated with protecting and safeguarding Caribbean networks and systems. We look at what's at stake, and we'll also look at some of the strategic responses that you would have been seeing. To get us started, it will be Mr. Shernon Osepa of the Internet Society. He would describe for us what is the evolving cyber threat landscape. I mentioned a little earlier that definitely technology has advanced, and the skills of the criminal element has also advanced along with it. So the law enforcement response must be effective. So I'll invite Shernon now to take the floor and make his presentation about the evolving cyber threat landscape. Shernon, over to you.
Yes, thank you very much, Nigel. Let me share my screen and we can start. I guess you can see my screen, right?
Yes, I can.
Yes. So first of all, I would like to thank the organizers, Aaron, CTU, LACNIC, for inviting us, for inviting Internet Society. It's always a pleasure for us, a pleasure and an honor to give our contribution to the development of the Internet. So basically, based on what you said, Nigel, I would like to focus also a bit on what Internet Society is doing in this regard. So I'll be highlighting, let's say, very high level, what we see in the Caribbean, but of course, working for the Internet Society, I would like to also give a contribution how ISOC is, can contribute in order for us to have a much safer, let's say, Internet environment, not only in the Caribbean, but in the whole world. So I think it's quite important for us to look at some global facts in order for us to understand what we are talking about. If we look, for example, at the economic impact of cybercrime, based on a report of a few years ago by Cybersecurity Ventures, we can see that, for example, on a yearly basis, we can see cybercrime damages cost of $6 trillion US. And those of you who are not familiar with trillion, billion, million, trillion, we are talking about 12 zeros behind that 6. That's $500 billion US a month, $115.4 billion a week, $60.4 billion a day, 684.9 million an hour. And then if you go all the way to 190,000 US dollars per second. These are significant numbers. If you look even at the 190,000 US dollars per month, I think most of us don't make, let's say, those amounts even per year, right? So we are talking about significant number of damage cost being seen within, let's say, the global cyber crime. If we look, for example, what did happen during, let's say, the pandemic, initially when it did start, but also what we are seeing nowadays. Initially, we have seen, for example, an increase of almost 700% what we call phishing attacks related to COVID. All of us, in one way or the other, were searching the internet, trying to get solutions for the challenges that we were seeing with COVID. So this was a unique opportunity for hackers to perform all these phishing attacks, given that people were trying to solve their problems. Also here in the Caribbean, we have seen some challenges in that regard. If we look at Jamaica, for example, with the Jam COVID app, which is an app that people were using to keep track of all these developments with respect to people coming to the island regarding COVID, quarantine, and all these kind of things. We have also seen a data breach with respect to that app. So the Caribbean is not immune. All things that we are seeing globally, these are happening in the Caribbean as well. If you look a couple of years back, just to mention Jamaica again, 2017 to 2018, we have seen cybercrime damage cost of around $100 million US. This was in 2017, even before the pandemic. So the Caribbean is not immune, and we are seeing the same challenges that we are seeing elsewhere taking place in the Caribbean as well. One of the other how do you call it, information that I know based on also my previous job at ICANN back then, the Caribbean is like a playing ground for hackers. They know that most of the times our networks are wide open. So this is the place where hackers come to prove their skills. And when they get all the knowledge that they're supposed to get, they go elsewhere to continue with what they're doing. So also, if we look, for example, at a report by the World Economic Forum of 2018, we see that, for example, from the 20 countries, the best countries prepared with respect to cyber attacks, the Caribbean didn't make it to the 21st countries on that list. We are not even mentioned on that list. Even if we look at Europe, for example, it's Norway that's on the 9th place. So even countries with a lot of resources, they have challenges to deal with cyber attacks, cybercrime, and how to protect their critical infrastructure. So what are we at Internet Society doing in this regard? Basically, what we are doing is to focus on what we call, how can we make the internet much stronger, a much stronger and resilient internet? And that is why we are focusing, have been focusing, and are still focusing on 5 projects this year. And going on next year, we will be doing that same thing as well. So the first one is what we call Internet Way of Networking. We would like to continue to defend what we call this structure, the internet structure that we have been using so far. A very maybe strange example would be the war that is going on right now, Russia and Ukraine. Some people are saying, okay, we need to cut off Russia from the internet. But people are not thinking what are the implications when you take those kinds of measures. So at the Internet Society, we are promoting what we call the Internet Way of Networking. We are promoting the internet, and if there are some other challenges, let's say political challenges or geopolitical challenges, then we need to find a way how to deal with those. But the internet itself, we need to find ways how to continue to protect that. And Internet Way of Networking is an example of that. There is another project that we are focusing on, and all these in one way or the other will contribute to a much safer internet. That is encryption, much more secure infrastructure. The global security routing, that's also one area that we have been focusing a lot on. How can we ensure that we have much more secure infrastructure. If you look at the internet itself, it has, let's say, the routes and also the domain names. And with respect to the routes, we can protect those with RPKI and other technologies. There is also one other project that we are focusing on is what we call the Network Distributed System Security Symposium. That's also one area where we discuss how can we keep this internet that we're using in a much secure way. And the last one is a bit more, let's say, philosophical area dealing with digital sovereignty, but that's also one area that we are focusing on. One of the challenges that we are facing nowadays when dealing with cybersecurity, and I think, Nigel, you did ask that question as well to the previous presenter regarding essential services. Most of the times we are focusing on one or two areas with respect to cybersecurity. But cybersecurity is a very broad team. So we need to look at it at a very holistic way. Normally at International Society, we look at it by focusing on 8 areas, and they are listed here. Most of the times you are focusing on a few of them. Let me just mention them very quickly. The first one is what we call securing the link, the internet itself that we're using nowadays. If you look how it was developed with TCP protocol and all the way how you transport data from one infrastructure to the other, there is a thing called the link that we're using. So we need to find ways how to protect that. The second one is the telecommunication infrastructure itself. You cannot have internet without having a telecommunication infrastructure. And us here from the Caribbean, sometimes it causes me, let's say, pain as a telecom guy when you look at the kind of infrastructures that we are building nowadays. We are just asking for trouble. It's very easy to commit, let's say, sabotage to these networks because they are above the ground and they are the way how they are constructed. You're just asking for trouble. But okay, let me not focus much on that right now. We also have the internet itself. When we talk about securing the internet, I'm not talking about securing Facebook, Google, Twitter, and these applications. We are talking about securing the domain name system and also the routing and the names. So that's something different. And then of course you have the computers, tablets, smart devices that we have. And on top of these devices, then we have all these applications that we're using, the data that we're using, the identity, and essential services is one area that we need to define that through what we call national cybersecurity strategy. So each country in one way or the other should have its own national cybersecurity strategy. And then based on that, you can define what are the essential services to you. For example, if you are in an environment where financial sector is important, then financial services will become an essential service to you. If you are in an environment where oil, gas, those kind of resources are important to you, then those will become essential services to you. So again, at Internet Society, what we are doing is to look at the holistic way of cybersecurity and not only, let's say, focusing on one or two areas. And that is why we are working with all policymakers, governments, and others to make sure that we have these services in place. Going back to your very first question, Nigel, with respect to the breaches that we are seeing in our region, we are almost seeing on a daily basis all kinds of new developments and taking place. Remember, these hackers, crackers, whatever you may call them, they are very, very knowledgeable. Sometimes, even can say most of the times, they have very high level, let's say, education, PhDs, master in computer science. So it's a real challenge how to keep up with all what they are doing. But in one way or the other, I believe if we adhere to these 8 areas, and then in one way or the other, at least we have that under control. I was asked to show only 4 slides, so I will keep it for now to here. And later on, if there are more questions, then we can make the deep dive. But for now, what I wanted to do is just to give you, let's say, very high level, the holistic view, how we at Internet Society look at Internet Society, at cybersecurity challenges. And then later on again, if there are questions, we can make the deep dive and focus on very specific area. So I'll keep it for now to here, and then going back to you, Nigel.
Thank you very much, Shernon, for getting us off the mark. I'll invite our listeners to begin. You can begin posting any questions you might have for Shernon under the Q&A tab at the bottom of the Zoom window. I do have one for you, but we'll save it for a little later. We'll go on to hear from our second panelist now, who is Ms. Kerry-Ann Barrett of the OAS's CICTE group. And Kerry-Ann will talk to us a bit about what's at stake for the Caribbean digital space and what are some of the impacts of cybercriminality on our Caribbean space. So over to you, Kerry-Ann. Welcome.
Thanks so much, Nigel, and thanks to the group, the consortium, RN, LACNIC, and CTU for inviting the OAS to speak. I feel bad, Shernon. I'll be using a little bit more than 4 slides, but it's pretty much not a lot of content on the slides, so that I'm hoping that's a good thing. The context I'd want to speak to us from today is recognizing, as we're trying to unravel, is the fact that in the Caribbean, we are investing a lot right now in a lot of digital technologies. CARICOM, with some foresight a few years ago, had come up with the digital ICT space. And I think spilling out of that, we can see evidence of several projects that have been coming out in the region. We have the World Bank Caribbean Digital Transformation Project, which is benefiting St. Lucia, Grenada, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and St. Kitts. We have the Costa Rican World Bank project. IDB is doing some stuff in Colombia, also in the Bahamas and Barbados. So I think regionally, especially focused on the Caribbean, we recognize that automatically what is at risk, and I think that's the easiest question to answer, is all of these investments we're doing. Every day there's a multitude of cyber attacks that are not attacking just one aspect of our population. It's attacking a combination of our assets, key resources, different groups of people with no distinction between what the physical borders are. It would mean then that as we look ahead is to figure out what are the tools that our public officers or private sector academia would need to actually protect what this is. To look at how things have happened over the past few years, and just to build on the previous presenter, regionally, we've been seeing the evolution of threats. And the reason why it's important to continue from this speaker before, it's because there's been an evolution over the past few years, culminating in 3 main types of attacks in our region. And the evolution is important to look at, because in 2020, and CARICOM has even, impacts have confirmed this as well with our data as well, is that we saw phishing, smishing, BEC attacks, which is the business email compromises happening. We saw malicious domain attacks. Then in 2021, we moved on to seeing more COVID-related attacks, which our previous speaker alluded to. But we're also seeing a lot of IoT device vulnerabilities, whether it's coming from the devices not being updated, whether it be that we're still using a lot of legacy systems with new systems. And in 2022, it hasn't gotten better. Malware, increased spear phishing is happening, increased attacks on persons who are now at home trying to find relationships. So we're seeing an increased amount of social media apps being hacked or date matching apps being hacked. But it's important to focus on the threats, because as I started off my intervention with the investment, looking at the threats, one of the things that is critical to now analyze is its data. All the things that we're investing in by providing improved services for the Caribbean region, by ensuring that we have, as a result of COVID, most of our government entities went virtual, so we need to have backups. We need to ensure that our systems, some of them are now, and data are now safe in the cloud. But at the end of the day, what they're looking for that is at cost for us and a profit for them is our data. And what does that data look like? I'm going to go through those 3 examples just to give a quick overview. So the data of interest for ransomware usually are the things that companies can't afford to lose. So what is at risk is they use the ransomware attack, whether it be through a phishing, whether it be through hacking, jacking, whatever they want to do, and they hijack your data. The first threat that they do with this extortion that they're executing is that they threaten you to disclose your data. Now, if you take one of those digital transformation projects, if we go as far down as you wanting to provide a better service for the registration of births, so you're now going digital registration of birth. This is one of the primary type of data for an individual. It's your name, your date of birth, who your parents are. It's backup data. It's data. It's your DNA of who you are. Now, if it is that an entity would not want that data to be disclosed, whether for reputational harm or because it's just privacy and there's data protection legislation in the country, there's a cost to the entity if this data is leaked. And they have to do a quick analysis. Do I pay the ransom or do I allow them to disclose the data? The second stage that they now have to consider, what if they threaten not just to disclose the data? Because we have data leaks all the time happening because of a previous employee or something. They could disrupt your service permanently, or they could cripple you temporarily. An entity then is at risk to think, do I want my services disrupted? How critical? If you look at the recent Massey attacks, Massey was able to shut down and they were able to manage communication to all their customers instantly. But what if they did not have the ability to shut down and still stay afloat after that shutdown happened? Another thing that they would say is that, I'll tell your customers. They'll threaten you and they'll say to you, okay, if you won't give me the info, let your customers know that you're not as secure as you say you are and that I have their data, and have them pressure you to pay the ransom to ensure their data is secure. The other factor I would want to examine really quickly is another area that's data of interest is what we call the remote desk protocol hacks. 50% of the ransomware attacks we're seeing now are coming through this. And building on our previous speaker, COVID forced many of us to go online without any secure data happening or secure protocols being put in place, either on our home laptops or home networks or those that are at work. And the remote desktop compromises have been happening more often than not, where they're actually hacking into the systems through the remote connections that we have. Now, what we recognize is that with access with the remote connection, they're able to go into your company's networks through your machine almost directly. And with that, companies and individuals and their personal data is at risk. Another quick one in terms of data is email compromises. We've seen from one of our sources, CICTE America's network, which is a network managed by the CICTE. It's a network of certs throughout the region. We do have some Caribbean certs a part of it. For example, Trinidad and Tobago, Guyana, Barbados, Jamaica are all part of the network. And we collate third-party data from many of our threat intelligence sources, and we give this to our member states for free. One of the things that we've observed is that we've been seeing almost 31% of the email compromises are related to government emails. We've been seeing on average almost 943 government emails being hijacked or compromised in some way or the other. And sometimes it's simple protocols, even with how we create our password, as simple as that, in terms of us still clicking on emails when they come in. Many of our member states, we've been encouraging them to start thinking about ways to do cybersecurity quick courses to ensure that as they digitize, as they offer services online, that their employees feel more equipped to keep themselves secure. No matter what you do in terms of your firewall and all the fancy technologies that you can invest in, the number one threat that you can't invest against without constantly bombarding them with training is the person behind the keyboard, because they're already inside your firewall, they're not outside your firewall. And another thing that we've been seeing is two-factor authentication, double factor, forgive me for the Spanish that's still there. The use of the two-factor authentication, it's we're seeing that it actually helps to reduce the attacks. Persons who've actually implemented that, for example, on Twitter, it causes a reduction in the threat of ransomware, but it's still data that they'll be going after. So one of the things that we have been encouraging persons to do in terms of what is at risk, your data, is to make sure that they actually put this on, actually activate two-factor, and actually go ahead even with their emails, or if it is with some of their password backups and where they keep or store their passwords, to ensure that this is actually activated. Nigel, I want to stop at that. I think what I would want to conclude on is just to think about when we have the conversation later today about what is at risk. I think I just wanted to just re-emphasize the main message is the Caribbean, we have to digitize, we have to compete, we have to be part of this global digital ecosystem that happens to survive. But in us doing that, we have to take into account that security by design is one of the things that we have to think at the beginning, the baseline. If we're going to be doing requests for proposals, if we're going to be doing contracts, ensure that security protocols are a part of what you ask the vendor to do. What is at risk? And that's the message I think that I would want to say is our data, our citizens' data, and that is what we need to work towards protecting. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Kerry-Ann, for that. I think it's clear, indeed, the value of data in today's world, and it wasn't something that was really very obvious before everything went online and became kind of instantly accessible. But we will get to the general discussion in a short while. And I would now like to invite our third speaker on this area, who is Mr. Fouché, who is the IT manager at the Ministry of National Security in the government of Trinidad and Tobago. And Sean is going to talk to us about some of the strategic responses to cyber criminality and what might be some of the useful or good practices that could be recommended. So Sean, I would invite you now to take over to you.
Hi, good morning all. Let me first say that it is my pleasure to be working again with the CTU and some of the other colleagues on this. I would have worked a lot with some of you when I was at one of my former jobs at CARICOM Impacts. And it is so interesting that I smiled as Kerry-Ann ended, because she ended by saying, what is at risk? And it's so interesting that we work with people for so long and we end up in that same mind space, because I actually have on my notes to start with, what is at risk? You know, we have to ask ourselves, as we start thinking in terms of cyber criminality, I've been asked to speak about approaching some best practices, standards, and innovation. And the question is, where do we start? Yes, from a national perspective, we talk about having national strategies in terms of how you're going to deal with cyber, how you're going to deal with cyber crime, cyber security, that kind of thing. But what I want to do is just to quickly align what we do to our everyday life. Crime and criminality is around us in every sphere. And actually, a recent report actually identified Trinidad and Tobago as number 6 in the world in terms of crime. So the question is, how do we protect ourselves? And I think in each of us in our daily lives, the first thing is that we don't want to be a victim of crime. So what we do, we try to prevent it. What does preventing it mean? Preventing it means being more aware of our own environment, being more aware of the threats that are around us, and putting mechanisms in place. We talk about also having a strategic approach in terms of looking at the long term and actually basically planning your way to get there. In our personal lives, we don't want to get affected by crime. So we are always very cautious. We lock our doors, we install alarms, we install camera systems, you name it. From a cyber perspective, I just want to deal a bit in terms of personal, and then we'll go to the business. What really is at risk? Well, We really want to protect our identity. And as Kerry-Ann alluded to, is really about the data and access to that data. So it starts with the devices that we use, whether it be a cell phone, your laptops, your mobile devices, and how do we sure to protect those? Obviously, we want to stay away from borrowing the cyber cafes, the public devices. Be very cautious when you use, and I normally tell people, do not use your personal information on those things. How do you access? Whether you access your email, your bank account, your online banking, your application for a form, that kind of thing. Look at your passwords, how you set them, what kind of protocols you put in place in your own personal life. Some people may have a little list somewhere right down of all the entities and what are the passwords that they use. Even if you're writing down a password, because sometimes we know with age, the big starter tell us, boy, I can't remember all these passwords, and so much things around me. How am I going to remember all of that? You don't have to write down the actual password. You can write down something close enough to what the password is, so that when you identify, when you see what you have written, that then eludes you. So you have to be a bit more creative, because you have to ask yourself, what if somebody were to get this written down piece of paper that I have everything on? What would be my fate? The connections, whether it be a connection at home, the connection on the bus or the mall, the free Wi-Fi. Let's be careful of those. A lot of times we travel and we get free Wi-Fi in the mall and that kind of thing. And yeah, we jump on them. And sometimes they ask you for your credentials, give you a little email address. And you know what we do? We put in the email and we probably put our email password on the password for the portal to get access to it. How do we protect what we do? So that's just some little things that I want us to start thinking about. Now, at the end of the day, when you look at it, if a crime does happen, you hope that the police will then capture the perpetrator, charge them, and bring them to justice. Within our communities, we all know that that in itself, even in the normal world, poses a challenge. Up to this week or last week, we had the Commissioner of Police in Trinidad and Tobago talking about the fact that one of the problems that they have is when they apprehend the perpetrators, they go before the court, they get bail and they're back out to repeat the cycle again. As it is, we have a number of Caribbean entities who do not even have proper cybercrime laws, proper cybercrime bills being passed through Parliament. In Trinidad and Tobago alone, our cybercrime bill was developed in 2012 and has not been passed to date. So at the end of the day, even if it were to happen, even if they were to find the person, even if they were to charge the person, on what basis? Not only that, cybercrime is one of those where you don't have to be at the location to commit the crime. And that's the big thing. So you actually have to apprehend a virtual person. That poses a challenge. So security is the number one thing. From a business perspective, what I want to basically look at is how do we create that strategic perspective? And it's really about creating a checklist, finding some order in what you do. You either start from the inside working your way out, or you start from the outside working your way in. If you start from the inside working your way out, let's ask ourselves two things. What really is the risk and what really is the aim? I really want to protect what I have inside from getting out, and I really want to protect people outside from getting in. Therein lies the challenge. Okay, so again, devices, all these internal devices. We also have some companies that go with a BYOD policy where you bring your own device. But that in itself poses a security risk. So it starts with some kind of policy in terms of how are we going to define devices on the network, and how are we going to deploy devices. And particularly when you have people traveling and stuff a lot, they may have a company laptop or a company phone and traveling and then connect to free Wi-Fi or some of the hotel Wi-Fi, which may not be secure. Okay, so ownership policies in terms of who actually owns the device, and policies in terms of how are we going to configure devices based on ownership and based on travel and based on patterns of use. the connectivity within our local environment, you have either wired or wireless. Both obviously require some strict protocols. We'll talk about things like firewalls and spam filters. But how many times or how many of us in IT actually have a listing of all our devices, actually have a listing of when last they were updated, actually have a listing of when licenses are up? And we talk about licenses being up, but licenses have a cost. And particularly in public sector, we know that that's where the problem lies. How do we then justify to those who are paying the bills, who talk a different language, and from the time you put up something, it costs too much? It calls for some creativity. So we talk about things like antivirus, ensuring that we have the antivirus installed, it is updated, all your patches installed. Understanding where to go to for support. Kerry-Ann just alluded to the whole idea of the certs. There is a TTC cert. How many of us are actually aligned with the TTC cert? And I'm proud to say that the TTC cert actually fall under the Ministry of National Security. So I work very closely with my counterparts there. But do we connect to them? Do we get advice from them? As the threats come out, are we aware of the threats, what is causing the threat, and we actually do what is required to protect our own network at the same time? There's obviously a cost-benefit analysis that needs to come into play. Yes, we will want to have the best of the best, but we can't afford the best of the best. And as we say in Trinidad and the Caribbean, we'll have the champagne taste, but the Moby pocket. Okay? So the question is not just about affordability, but how do we justify the cost? And sometimes we have to take off the non-technical hat and we have to find a way to write those justifications. Kerry-Ann just talked about RFPs and how do we justify. We have to find ways to justify them in very non-technical manner. As we move towards digitization and as we move to implementing systems, how do we get those non-technical people on board? We speak here and we all know, I don't even have to go into all these technical things about firewalls and how they work and all that. We know that. Question is, how do we get those who are non-technical, who sometimes have to do the approvals, the PSs, the CEOs, and what they are looking at is front of them is, what am I getting? This is the money you want me to spend, yes, but what am I getting for it? And therefore being able to quantify, and the first presenter, Shernon, I really want to thank you for some of those figures. Those figures, every time you see those figures, you see them being increased. And using some of those and having also a mechanism to quantify the value of your own risk is really important. So that way it helps you to justify the spend within your own entity, right? And the last thing that I want to speak on is to touch right back to what Kerry-Ann spoke. Awareness and training. How many of us have actual awareness training? Sometimes you see things come across the help desk, you see reports, and you say, but people should know this. That is what we think because we are technical. We have to change our mindset. As technical people, we have to change our mindset. I was at a recent organization and saw a ransomware type of attack where they actually took a company letter, doctored it and edited so well, looking for payments to go to a particular vendor because we did another international business. And luckily, the finance person, he was the one who up and say, wait, why does money go into this particular bank? We've never sent money for this client to this bank before. And that's what triggered it. The perpetrators out there are getting very creative. And we too have to always be, they are always one step ahead of the game. They don't have budgets, they don't have to justify spend. It's a little bit easier for them. We do. But we also have to start to think like they do. Awareness to your staff is very important. And sometimes you run a training course, you run awareness, whether people come in or not, you need to get them to come in. But not only that, understanding that staff keep changing, staff are updated. How do we then ensure that people are aware? Make it part of your daily routines within your organizations, that your technical staff, when they go to fix a problem, they help people understand the challenges. when we see the risk, we need to educate those around. We need to keep informing, communication. So I want to leave you with 2 words, awareness and communication. 2 key elements in terms of protecting ourselves. Let's try to identify those little creative ways. Sometimes you may want to just to simulate a little attack on your own network. You're trying to get money to upgrade the firewall. It might sound harsh, but sometimes just bring down the firewall for a little morning. To let the head of finance know, listen, this is the risk that we run. Let's find little creative ways, but more than that, awareness and communication. And I'll leave you with those 2. Thanks a lot, people. Nigel?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sean, for that. And I think those are some very practical and useful perspectives that you presented there. I actually, before you spoke, I had penned a question myself as to whether we can talk about security of these networks and systems without addressing the digital skills of the users. And the last comments you made suggest not. And I don't know if any of the other panelists, well, I expect the other panelists would be of similar view. I'll invite everyone to put questions into the Q&A and so that they can be addressed. I saw Kevin Swift's hand go up. I don't know if Kevin, you wanted to raise something?
Yes, hi Nigel. I think we were thinking the same thing. Basically, I wanted to get somewhat of a drill down. So firstly, I join the congratulations to the speakers because I think the points raised were very insightful, especially just drilling down or breaking down what are some of these security concerns from a non-technical perspective. And on that very point, I just wanted to hear from probably Kerry-Ann, I know she has to go just now, and Shernon, on what are some of those initiatives or practices that you could drill down from your institutions when it comes to that sort of people-centric awareness building?
Thanks, Kevin, for the question. One of the things that we promote is, Sean alluded, in terms of having a national cybersecurity strategy is one thing. That's something as a nation you can pretty much say to your citizens that this is what you're doing. But on the institutional level, there are a couple of things that we recommend, and I'll just name just a few. One is to ensure that you do have somebody who's in charge of either cybersecurity awareness and not just your IT manager, because the IT manager is really focused a lot of the times on either procurement, network security, focused on all those things. Having in your institution somebody who has specific responsibility for cybersecurity or digital security, ensuring that the roles are distinct between those who are just doing the everyday equipment management as opposed to some of the softer skills that are needed for the institution is critical. Secondly, we also recommend that you have a distinct program for your team or for your staff. Sometimes you can get volunteers who would actually do this, reach out to institutions such as ours or others that could provide some material. There are free materials online from an entity called Stop Think Connect. And I know in the Caribbean, we have click something surf that is also there as well. But all these materials are free. A lot of our 13 of our member states actually participated in a UK project 3 years ago that created web portals with Stop Think Connect and with Get Safe Online. So they would have that material that's free of cost. The last thing I would probably recommend quickly is there are free tools that you can implement to actually do quick tests with your employees to see if they would actually succumb to a phishing attack, where it sends them a spoof email that is not to tell them update their password and to see if they actually click it, to see if they're actually looking at which email it came from. So those are my 3 quick tips, Kevin, and I'll probably hand over to Shernon because I'm sure he has some more.
Yes, it's all about education. It's all about education. I mean, if you talk with people sometimes, I just had a friend a couple of days ago who were hacked by just clicking and doing stupid things on Facebook. I mean, we are living in a world that by now you should be acquainted with what is happening out there. It's we have the real world out there, but we also have the online world where all these things are happening. So that is why at Internet Society, what we're doing, we are focusing a lot on education, capacity building. We continue to talk because I think that's the only way where we can get things done. And sometimes people should go through these difficulties as well in order for them to learn. I would not mention name now, but we have been talking with a particular minister regarding cybersecurity strategies and these kind of things. And he didn't want to listen until his email was hacked. And then they contacted us. They want us to provide trainings and these kind of things. So again, we have heard a lot of measures that can be taken, but it's important for us to focus on raising awareness that the world that we're living in right now, it's not the world that we have been living in like 20, 30 years ago. So we need to be aware of this and see how we can solve these challenges.
Thank you very much. Actually, Kerry-Ann had to leave us at this point. Although I did have a question I would have liked to post her about some of the projects, digital transformation projects that she had in her presentation. I guess we'll have another opportunity. I have a leftover question for Shernon though. Shernon, you talked about all the efforts that the Internet Society is making and so on. What sort of public policy or governmental action would you like to see that might support what ISOC is doing?
Okay, so I need to take a look at all the projects that we have. So if I focus, for example, on the first one, internet way of networking, governments can play a key role in this regard, because if you look at the model, the internet model that we are using, openness, once they are acquainted that how the internet functions, they are they agree with this model. They can also help us to promote this model. Another one is, for example, securing global routing, at which we do have a very specific program called Manners, Mutual Agreed Norms on Internet Routing Security, that we have been promoting around the globe for some while now, so the technical community can benefit from that one. But with respect to, let's say, policymakers, governments, regulators, I believe, let's say, the internet way of networking is one of the projects that they can benefit of, because it's very high level. The only thing that they need to do is to, let's say, to adhere to best practices that are being suggested. And the other ones, in one way or the other, they are technically focused as well. But all of them together, I think then we can achieve the ultimate goal.
Okay. And maybe I could ask Sean, I'll rephrase the question that I had for Kerry-Ann a bit and direct it towards Sean. It relates to assessing the impact of these digitalization projects, or maybe even a cybersecurity type investment. You mentioned in your presentation, Sean, that maybe sometimes you have to take drastic measures to bring home to the persons who hold the purse the need to invest in cybersecurity and technology type solutions. My question is, yes, we do invest eventually, and some significant funds are spent. To what extent do you see an assessment being made after implementation as to whether these investments really achieving the goals that they were intended to? And is that one of the best practices that you would recommend?
Yeah, Nigel, that's certainly a good point. The fact of the matter is that in the case of securing of networks. You're trying to get a company to pay for something that they're really not getting in their hand and they really don't even know the value of. They're really not seeing it. If I were to come to you and say, I have a phone to sell, give me $5,000 and you buy the phone, you get a phone in your hand. But when you had to go to a CFO and tell them, spend $5,000 to pay for a license for a firewall, you're not seeing what you get it. So there's two sides. It is the justification up front and rightly, as you said, it is the assessment at the end. So recently, the CICTE in Trinidad would have been working with, it was a UK project doing an assessment throughout Trinidad in terms of looking at a number of critical companies and doing an assessment in terms of where they are in terms of identifying risk. A number of entities would have done some other risk assessments, and we basically use those risk assessments as the platform to justify projects going forward. I don't think, however, that we do enough in terms of that monitoring and evaluation, looking at the aftermath and seeing were the objective actually achieved. And that is something that we need to do. And the other side to that, or something that I just want to tie into that, is we have to start identifying, and I want to align it to real life. If something happens to us from a crime perspective, we go to the nearest police station and we report it. And we improve thereafter. What we did, we would never do it again. If something happens to us in the cyber realm, what do we do? Who do we report it to? Some entities don't even know where to turn or what to do and how to improve. And normally you get robbed, you tell all your neighbors so that everybody now becomes more secure. But when we get attacked, we don't want to tell nobody because we want to protect our reputation as an organization. And therefore, we are basically leaving all our other entities open to the same type of attack. So yes, the after fact, looking at probably annually or quarterly, doing our own system assessments, not only from the perspective of identifying risk areas, but seeing what were the improvements that we made, and then tying that back to ensuring that if something happened, how do we spread the news so that we all learn from the experiences?
Any comment you want to add to that, Shernon? For example.
Yes. That's one of the challenges, basically what Sean said, one of the challenges that we have been seeing in the Caribbean, especially with banks. None of them will tell you that they were hacked, but I can almost tell you that on a daily basis, they are being hacked. But of course, they don't want to lose customers, so they don't want to tell you anything. Just look, for example, at all these credit cards that are being hacked. What they're doing is just issuing you a new credit card and then business will continue. So they're not really addressing the challenges that we are facing. And then, of course, at the end of the year, you need to pay more, let's say, fees in order for you to maintain that credit card. But I agree with you, Sean. I think in one way or the other, we should be able to look each one another in the eyes and say, okay, these are the challenges that we are facing and how we can solve them. The problem is that sometimes when people admit that they did commit something wrong, it would have consequences for them. And that is why people may hide and not tell others what happened. But if you look at cybersecurity, in one way or the other, in order for us to help others, we need to explain what happened in order for us to see these as best practices, in order for us to make all these networks better for all of us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure.
So I just want to add something, and Shernon, you made a very, very good point. It is up to us as professionals in our countries to create that safe space where people will be willing to share. Now, in the case of the banks, I'm just going to use that as a typical example. Obviously, because of reputation, people don't want to share. The creation of a financial CIRT could be a solution because the banks will come together to work on projects when it benefits them. So, for example, you have where you could actually use your card at any ATM. That came about as a project by all banks coming together within a country. Similarly, if banks were to be able to come together to treat with cyber issues, they will share within their own space. And it is really about looking at, in some cases, sector-specific solutions, but how do we create that safe space where people are willing to share for the benefit of all, rather than gaining competitive advantage from it.
And I guess this is where the CICTE community could assist, because that is a trusted society essentially that is being created at various levels. Just to mention from CTU's own experience, we talked about improving the digital skills and awareness of the users. That we've certainly internally taken steps to raise the awareness and understanding of all our employees to the various threats that are out there. And one of the presenters mentioned that there are, it might have been shown, low cost or even free tools out there that allow you to assess your people's skills in this area, in recognizing phishing threats or email compromise and so on. And granted, some of those tools might be from suppliers in the business who basically may be looking for business, but I think you can find trusted partners out there that can help you to assess and keep current with the various threats, that whole threat landscape stuff out. I'm looking to see if there were any other questions. There was one sort of question that came up, but you might have addressed it in the last comment about the banks and sharing. This was from Angus, I think it was Brown. How do you get them to share from a policy perspective? How do you get, persons who are hacked to share from a policy perspective? In the feature presentation, actually, we asked, when I had asked the presenter, Daniel, about critical infrastructure and whether that needed to be defined legally and so on, and he recommended that it be codified, that what critical infrastructure is, such that if there are hacks in any such infrastructure, it must be disclosed to law enforcement and so on. So there might be some legal measures that we can also seek to apply to some of these things. Well, we have a couple minutes left, so maybe I'll just leave that. I'm not seeing any additional questions or hands raised, so I'll just leave it to you two gentlemen who are left, maybe to make a final comment before we close.
Yes, just one comment I would like to give with respect to certs or C-certs. We need to put things into perspective, right? Because if you look at a cert, it's like a fire brigade. It's important, you need to have it. But if you go to a place and where a county, for example, and you see, let's say, fire brigades all over the place, then you know there is a big problem in that particular country, especially with fire, because you're not supposed to see them that as much. So that's the same thing with C-cert as well. We need to have them, but we need also to focus on secured infrastructure, because I've seen people focusing on C-certs and they're not focusing on how can we make these networks more resilient, So we need to put things into the right context. C-certs are important, but you need also to focus on how can we have much more resilience network, and then of course the work of the C-certs will just become less. So that's one of the points that I would like to give.
Thank you. Sean, any final closing comment?
Well, I mean, and that's a very good one. I mean, Shernon had it there. You see them, you start to get worried. But the question is, how do we change their role from being after to before? How do we change their role as helping us to prevent rather than, it's like a fire services. A lot of people feel that fire services to out the fire. But fire services also play a very important role in doing some assessments beforehand, doing a lot of the education and doing a lot of the sharing, creating those safe spaces for sharing. And so on that note, I want to say really and truly, workshops like these are also very important in terms of how do we share experiences, what worked and what didn't work. Communication continues to be the key. Awareness continues to be the key. But I'm saying too, as we try to make people aware, as we do the training, let's start thinking outside the box, because for too long we continue to have training sessions, training material, everything is right there. But are the people actually learning? As we change the staff, are the people actually adhering to what we learn? And therefore, sometimes it calls for a different level of creativity. It calls for a different level of how do we approach it? And every organization is also going to be quite different, right? So how do we tailor those learnings and those awareness practices to ensure that we are getting some results? And as Nigel also alluded to earlier, measurement of success is very important. So that would then help us to tweak and to modify as we go along.
All right, thank you very much, folks. We will leave it there at this point. And on behalf of the organizers, I would like to thank our three speakers, Mr. Shernon Osepa of ISOC, Ms. Kerry-Ann Barrett of OAS CICTE, and Mr. Sean Fouché. Special thanks to Sean, in fact, because he kindly consented to replace one of our initially scheduled speaker who had a late breaking emergency. So thank you very much to all three, and we very much appreciate your contributions today. I will now hand over to the moderator for our final roundtable session. That session will be looking at privacy and security, and I'll introduce and hand over to Mr. Kevin Swift of LACNIC. Kevin?